It's Friday. I got up kind of early, but I actually woke up and sat up for a minute. I was actually rested up, and I got dressed, and I forgot to pre-make my eggs yesterday. But I brushed my teeth, and I flossed, and I forgot to pre-make my coffee yesterday, but I made it this morning. I almost had a thought about not going to work, but I ignored it. And now I'm going to make my morning coffee. And now I'm thinking about what I'm going to watch. But I choose to watch Flight. But Flight is a movie about a drunken pilot, and he drinks knowing that he has to fly a plane that day. The planes end up crashing, and they end up having an investigation. And his lawyer is almost getting off on that investigation. But in the end, he can't stand for his girlfriend to be blamed that died in the crash. And he confesses, and he ends up going to prison. But it makes him a better man, and it makes his relationship with his son better, and it makes his relationship with people better, and it makes him better. But he's still in prison, and he lectures to prisoners. And my admiration this morning was going to be have a good attitude and be nice to people. And because it makes people feel good. And because it makes me feel good. And because the most important part of this somewhat simple job is my growth. Because my growth. And it's because the Republicans and Democrats can't come to an agreement. But I'm kind of sure that they're making progress. And they have said that they will have a deal within a week. And the fact that Grand Blanc, because of the church fire and because someone didn't respect free speech and the people lost their lives, are in heaven. And a water main in Novi, Michigan. And Novi, Michigan's outside Detroit, Michigan. And the water mains break all over Detroit area. But what causes water mains to break? And how water main affects drinking water for the residents. And the residents have to boil water. And boiling water kills bacteria because bacteria can kill. And the shooter of the church in Grand Blanc was a 40-year-old veteran. And because I'm trying to find my voice. And because having your own voice matters. And people listen to what matters. And what matters is unique. And uniqueness gets listeners. And listeners get subscribers. And subscribers get downloads. And how I feel Trump is a good guy. I don't feel he's prejudiced. And how I feel he only cares about the rich and not the poor. And how I feel that anybody that's not in his corner, he gets rid of. And how I feel that he built a system of loyalists. And how that's the way he can get bills approved that he wants approved. And now he's dismantling the entire government system. But he's the leader of our country. And how in 3 years, there'll be another leader of our country. And now that leader will have to try and clean up Trump's changes, and how some things won't be able to be changed because some of those things are permanent. And how I think sometimes that I'm not a quitter, and how I never give up, and how nobody cares, and how you're responsible for your own growth, and how I used to work for the railroad, and how I left the railroad because it was too much. But I had something else lined up, and what I had lined up was gig work. And gig work pays more, but gig work has less benefits. And I was doing good work, and I was working 12 hours a day, and I only had 2 hours of free time, and I had to go to bed early, and I had no life, and I had to consider those factors, and how I had to change my hours to 8 hours a day, 7 days a week, because that gave me a life in the afternoon. And how I regret my decision on buying a sports car, and how I only drive the car 1 day a week. But I'm making a car payment on the car, and how I feel that the car payment is a waste of money, and that money could be used for something else because money is hard to come by. And I'm interested in tariffs and how Republicans think Democrats want to get health care for illegal immigrants, and how Democrats only want to get health care for immigrants who are already in the state, and how Republicans don't disagree with illegal immigrants who commit crimes being deported back to their own country, and how Republicans don't believe Democrats, and how it's creating a public warfare, and how that warfare is dividing our country. But the most important thing is who is in control, and who is in control of what matters, and how I had to find my voice, and how that process didn't happen overnight. That process took patience, and how patience is important, and how patience takes time, and how process is part of success, and how to be successful means finding yourself, and how part of finding yourself is finding your voice, and how finding your voice is part of creating a podcast, and how when people listen to your podcast, they want to hear your voice, and they want to hear your process, and that's what makes your podcast unique. And how being unique is what makes your podcast different from others, and why being different from others is important, and how importance is what makes you stand out, and how standing out is what makes your podcast eventually popular, and how being popular is important, but being important is not the only factor, and how speaking through your podcast is therapy, and how therapy helps people who listen to your podcast, and how you may think what you have to say is not important, and how what you have to say is unique, and how being unique is why people listen to your podcast, and how your uniqueness triggers mental health healing in people, and how mental health healing is what makes people feel better, and how helping people with mental health healing is part of a narrative mindset process, and how a narrative mindset process is what this podcast is all about, and how the narrative mindset process is saying how I narrate processes from my mindset, and how my mindset is important, and how my importance makes me unique, and how my uniqueness will eventually attract listeners, and how, as listeners, you matter, and how you matter because my voice helps your mental healing, and how in today's world we need mental health healing, and how mental health healing helps people make different decisions, and how the process of the narrative mindset is designed, and how that process means creativity, and how creativity is a sign of design, and how listeners see that creativity, and how creativity is respected because creativity is a process, and how people can see your process, and how your processes work, and work is progress. I'm going to a podcast convention next week, and they have these conventions every year. And at these conventions, when you pitch a podcast amongst other podcasts to possibly get deals with companies, and I have this white shirt that I got from Montgomery Ward before they closed, and I got about 5,000 of them. And they have distinct lifted ghost writing on them. And I wear these for my podcast because they match with the narrative mindset mentality. And the white shirt with the lifted white writing is neutral to my content. And it's just a white t-shirt with the letters NM on it, lifted. And it's made out of rayon and cotton. And that's because cotton wrinkles easy. And rayon and cotton has stretch to it, and it doesn't wrinkle. And when you perspire on it, it doesn't stick to you. Because when you're in front of people trying to promote your podcast, you sweat. And you need something that's not going to stick to you, and it's not going to wrinkle. And I wish I could find somebody who has their own t-shirt making business, and I could have them make these shirts. And they would have a ton of business because I'm pitching my podcast. And when my podcast catches on, I will have tons of shows to do. And I would need a massive amount of shirts. And if I had somebody to make these shirts just the way I like them, they would have a ton of business. And they wouldn't be able to take on other business because I would need so many shirts. And when the catches on, I will have enough t-shirts. And I would need the person who makes my t-shirts and who has a t-shirt making business to make my t-shirt perfectly and exactly like the t-shirts that I wear on my podcast. And making t-shirts for me, you would have so much business, and I would need so many t-shirts. And I would need t-shirts just in case. And the person who supplies your material would be so overwhelmed with business because they would need to make so much material to keep up with the amount of t-shirts that you're making, because I need so many t-shirts, because my podcast has become so popular that I need a ton of t-shirts. And I need spare t-shirts just in case. And the people who make the material for the people that make the material so that you can make so many t-shirts have to hire so many people. Because when I become popular, your name will be popular because my podcast is so popular. And you would be the only one who's making t-shirts for me. Because you can make t-shirts that fit just right and feel so right. And you make just the right material for my t-shirts. But the only thing is you wouldn't be able to make t-shirts for anybody else because all your free time would be consumed and you would be making a massive amount of t-shirts for me. And my podcast would be known worldwide. And this would mean you would have to get a warehouse so that you could keep up with the demand for t-shirts. And your supplier would have to let the person who gets them their raw materials know that they would have to hire more people because of the massive demand they would have, because I would need so many t-shirts because my podcast would be so popular. And the news stations would find out that you were making t-shirts for me. And you were the only one who was making t-shirts. And your t-shirt business would be so popular because my podcast would be nationwide. And they would interview you, and you would let them know that you're making t-shirts for the Narrative Mindset podcast. And you were the only one who was making t-shirts for the Narrative Mindset podcast. And after that interview, you would start to get calls, people wanting you to do their business and make their t-shirts. And you would tell them, I only make t-shirts for the Narrative Mindset podcast. And they would try to pay you more, but you would turn them down. And then the host of the Narrative Mindset podcast, Gerald Tabb, would pay you more for being loyal to the Narrative Mindset podcast.